Okay. Well, good evening or good afternoon or whenever you're watching this, everybody. Just yesterday, for tonight's theme, I'd decided it'd be a good idea to go back on something that Dino had brought up a few chats ago about this overlapping generation. Because the reason why I thought that is because when we used to do the doors for those of us who used to do the doors, and then we used to come in with this good news about the kingdom and the paradise of the earth and stroking the badges and that sort of stuff. The people we spoke to then always said to us, when's this supposed to happen? They want to know when's it going to happen because we bang on about how bad the world was. When's this going to happen? And so we could therefore, within a generation or even a couple of decades, say, well, it has to happen before the generation who saw 1914. So it has to happen before maybe the end of 1990, something like that. And of course, now we have this overlapping generation. So if you have this overlapping generation, we should therefore now that when we approach the Carters or they come to our door, if they ever do that, and then we could say to people without pretending we know, we could say, "Oh, when's this Armageddon going to come?" And then we need to get from them to see whether they understand their own beliefs. We need to get from them pinpointed within a couple of decades like we used to have to do, so then they should be able to tell us that. And if they don't know us that, then we can then go to them and say, oh, by the way, according to your own teachings, it has to come between this period. And if it doesn't come in this period, if I'm still alive, if Dino's about to tell us when this ends, we can therefore say that that signifies the end of the Jehovah's Witnesses, unless they dramatically change their teaching. So that's the first thing I want to discuss. So I'm throwing it over to Dino to tell us all about it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I thought it'd be best just to maybe recap what we're talking about with the different groups. So remember, we said the official teaching, although I think most witnesses probably don't realize this because they've not read the small print, but there's actually three groups of the anointed. There's the original first group from 1914 who were alive to see the events of 1914. There's the overlapping generation, which is those second group of anointed who become anointed and are anointed whilst some of the first group are still alive, and thus they overlap with the original group. So if we're talking about a future end, it would be the end of that second group. Okay. The third group of anointed that there is today, they don't count as far as the generation are concerned, right? The society, that book, I think it's Let Your Kingdom Come, I think it's called. It points out that the third group of anointed don't form part of the generation. It's only the first two groups. So as far as calculating when the end would come, the third group don't come into it because they're not part of the generation. Okay. So Splain had said in his explanation of the overlapping generation that he took Fred Franz, the then president, as the sort of a marker point, and he died in, I think it was 92. I think it was 92 is when he passed away. So he says they can't say for certain that he was the very last of the anointed. Probably wasn't. There probably would be maybe some more still alive, but he was basically taking that as a sort of the line more or less for when we were in the hall, we basically thought, and of course the magazines did actually say that this new system would come before the generation of 1914 had passed away, and some magazines actually and some books did actually say before the end of the 20th century. So anyone that was in the hall at that time, late 80s, 90s, we basically, although nobody really kind of said it, but I think in our own mind's eye, we all saw 2000, the millennium, that was going to be, that's the absolute outpost for this generation. It's got to come before the year 2000. Because, for instance, if in 1914 you were 16 years of age, right? If you were 16 years of age in 1914, by the year 2000, you would be 102 years of age, right? So, although it's not unheard of for people, obviously, to reach that age, you do get some individuals live as long as that. But generally, most people today, you're doing well to get 80, 90 years. And I think Franz was about 90 odd years when he passed. So really, 2000 was really in our mind's eye, certainly in mine, and I think in yours as well. That generation really basically had passed away by 2000, as the scripture says, would by no means pass away. So in other words, it would come before there was any real question that that generation could have passed away. So once we get to the year 2000, we're basically, they must have. You can't then say, will by no means pass away at that point. So to get a sort of a working figure in the future as to when the second generation's time, this overlapping generation's time would be up, then I'm thinking if in 1980, take for instance 1980 when we were in the hall, more or less. If you were 40 years of age in 1980, then you'll be 85 years of age today. Okay? And I think some of those recent brothers that went on to the governing body, Winder and the banana splits guy, Flegel, they're slightly younger than us. So, so even taking, if they were about 20 years of age in 1980, that would make them, well, they were probably just slightly younger. But if you were 20 years of age in 1980, you'd be 65 today. All right.
Yes.
Now, see, if you were born, I've worked out that if you were born in 1965, right, by the year 2050, 25 years from now, the year 2050, if you were born in 1965, you'd be 85 years of age, right? So we were born 62.
Yeah.
Okay. So going that Winder and Flegel are basically just a couple of years younger than us. When we're hitting 2050, they're going to be in their 80s, right? So again, what's the sort of a general age you would expect to get to? 80, 85, 90 maybe at most. So if a generation was by no means to pass away, then if they're hitting 85 in the year 2050, then, and again, this is just off the top of my head, but figures I've just done myself, I reckon that the year 2050 is about the maximum that this current understanding could go to. It's the new year 2000, if you like. It's the new outpost. Because beyond that year, 2050, these anointed would have to be getting into their 90s and beyond. So if the generation was by no means to pass away, then I personally think 2050 would have to be the sort of a limit. Because if you think about it, if 2050 would be 136 years from 1914, right? 136 years from 1914 would be 2050. And 136 years is, if you're going by the Bible's generation of 40 years, so we read the accounts in Exodus about the wandering in the wilderness, and that generation was 40 years. So if that's a Bible generation, then 136 years from 1914 to 2050 would effectively be almost 3.5 generations, right? So this 3.5 generations will by no means pass away by the year 2050 by that calculation. So,
Mm,
so when you think about it, 25 years, it's not that long away.
no.
But it's as I say, I personally think that's about as far ahead that you could really go with that doctrine, because basically you'd have to be. I mean, when ones are not you're not appointed, you're not appointed as that anointed. But if you become anointed, if God were to choose his anointed to replace ones that were unfaithful, then what sort of age group would he be appointing? Would he be appointing very young men, inexperienced, or women inexperienced, not many years in the hall, or would he be appointing ones that have served faithfully? I think the understanding was always that new anointed would be ones that have served longest, more experience.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't expect anybody from the 1980s any less than being 20 years old. I would think 30 to 40 would be the sort of
Yeah.
age group.
Yeah.
I think that'd be
Funny.
reasonable.
So in other words, going by your calculations, you think that the furthest reach they can get is 2050. I don't know whether either of us are going to be alive at 2050, but anyway, we can hope. But the interesting thing is that it all what you just said there is quite interesting. Is what if you like Google a generation, if you could put a Google generation, you do the AI, it changes a lot because the Alex Salmond referendum once in a generation, yeah, and of course that argument's still rumbling on now. What is a generation? And when you do put it into Google, something's limited to 20 or 30 years. Okay,
Yeah.
20 or 30 years. So if we go
Yeah.
by the biblical generation, it's only 40 years. So in other words, we're not even going to 2050. We're having to scrape it all the way back to maybe when we're living now. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's us.
A Bible generation of 40 years is quite a large generation.
Yeah.
When I was looking at this before, it was talking about all the different Generation X and Generation Z, and um, some of those generations are maybe 10 years before the
Yes.
next one. So as I said as well, that sometimes you can calculate a generation by it's the period alive between two events, maybe would be a generation. So there's different ways of looking at it, but certainly, um, I think a Bible generation of 40 years is quite a large generation. It's a large
Okay.
period of
Right.
time.
Okay. So if it is 40 years, and let's roll back to Freddie Franz dying in 1990, and it'll be the ones that overlapped him. So what's 1990 plus 40 years? It's 5 years away.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
2030.
yeah. I mean, you think we've said it before a couple of times, but Stephen Lett's comment about we're in the end of the last days of the last days.
Finally.
So he's talking about it being so close,
Yeah.
that 2050. I think I'm sort of giving them a lot of leeway.
Ah,
Um,
I think you've been more than generous, to be honest
very
with you.
generous.
Very generous. Because
Trying to
I wish you brought it a bit closer towards, so then you could go up and say, by the way, if you were still here in 5 years' time in 2030, we all know it's a lie. So I'd like to be able
Yeah.
to do that. So I'm a bit
Well,
disappointed you've gone for 2050 because I might not be here to say to Joe's Witnesses. So what happened then?
well, I don't know that they'll be functioning
Yeah,
by
that's
then.
true.
They might stop functioning long before then, the way things
Yeah,
are
yeah,
going
yeah.
actually. Um, But I say, yeah, maybe I'm being a bit generous with the timescales, but I'm just trying to stretch it as far as possible. But as I say, the likes of Winder and Flegel, they would be 85-ish round about then.
Yeah.
So that really is.
Yeah, that's it. That's a cut
top
off.
limit.
And you're being very generous. Right, okay. So that's the first thing that I wanted to bring. So we're hovering between you're going for 2050, I'm going for 2030. Okay. So I'd love to get, if we meet the Carters and say, can you give us, when do you think, and let's see what date they settle with. That'll be interesting.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's just pretend that Armageddon is going to happen. And when you do speak to the witnesses, they always say that God is a God of love. And the reason why Armageddon hasn't come yet is giving the opportunity for millions, only millions, not billions, millions of people to come into the organization to be saved. In other words, if you ain't in the Jehovah's Witness organization, you will not be saved. It is, it's your number one qualifier to get through Armageddon is that you need to be in his organization. And as the witnesses have often said, just because you are in the organization doesn't necessarily mean you will survive Armageddon, because they're just saying that you have to, if you are just a token witness, maybe that won't get you through either, despite doing your whatever you do. So that isn't always a guarantee. But the first step to survive Armageddon is you need to be in the organization. Okay, so I said to Dino, based on that fact and how many Jehovah's Witnesses there are, and God being a God of love. But when you go back into the Bible, there are numerous examples of where God's love doesn't extend to the innocents. And we're referring to people who aren't old enough to make that decision for themselves, which is really young people, children. And we know that there's numerous examples in the Bible where God would say to, that when the Israelites went into cities, spare nobody, even cattle. Even if you thought, well, I'll kill the family, but I really like that cow, you had to kill everything, and that would include babies and children. So God at that time, just because they've been brought up as whatever religion they were at that time, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you're an innocent child, you're going down. The same as in Egypt, of course, when the firstborn, that in a large nation, instead of just punishing the obstinate Pharaoh, decided a really good idea is to kill the firstborn of everybody who didn't have the lamb on the door. So, and that would definitely affect thousands and thousands of children. And then, of course, we have the case in the flood again, where probably thousands of children die then. In other words, God, when it comes to children, it doesn't matter what age you are, you're going down. So what I said to Dino I said, Dino, can you try and just get a round figure if Armageddon really going to happen, and if you're not a baptized Jehovah's Witness, or you're in the family and your mum and dad are witnesses, that you're probably going to die at Armageddon because you're a Muslim or a Hindu or whatever it is, just to give us a figure, because I'd love to be able to know what that figure is. That when you do speak to the Carters and say, is God a God of love? Yes. Well, can you explain to me this number are going to die at Armageddon? So, Dino, what's the figure?
Yeah, well, again, I went to my AI and I asked it just to further calculate some figures that I'd asked to do before. So I asked it I says, taking into account youths, Jehovah's Witness youths, being anything between 1 and 18 years of age, considered a youth, all right? They said that the AI said that there would be approximately about 2 million JW youths up to 18 years alive today out of the almost 9 million witnesses that there are. And it said that in the world today, there's 2 billion youths
2 billion.
worldwide. 2 billion.
2 billion. From 1 to 18.
1 to
1 to
18.
18.
2 billion youths. And I said, well, what would that figure be, allowing for population growth in the next 25 years, taking us again to 2050?
Yeah.
It actually says that there wouldn't be that much of a change in the figures. They would go up slightly, but not very much. There would still be, because the witnesses' expansion is slowing down and it's not what it should be. It says that it would still be about 2 million youths in the ranks of the JWs by 2050. And again, the world youth would be about 2 billion in 2050. So it wouldn't really change that much
Right.
in the 25 years. The figures would remain much the same. What it did say that the growth in world population in the next 25 years would probably mostly in areas like Japan, China, India, these sort of
Right.
Eastern Asian countries. That's where there would be population growth, not so much in Europe or the Americas. Now that got me thinking about those are countries where the witnesses aren't, I don't think, particularly strong in numbers. Japan, China, India. I mean, I'm sure they've had missionaries in there for some time, but and I also said Africa. Now I know the witnesses are a bit more successful in Africa, but again, I don't think that's where their numbers are booming. I think the numbers have been booming in South America. They've been dropping in Europe, I think. South America maybe doing quite well. And it says again that where the witnesses have had the most success is where Christendom's missionaries had success in previous generations. They always keep saying, I've had this a few times said to me, speaking to the Carters, and they say, but who's doing the worldwide preaching? Who's the only ones preaching? And I say, well, one of the things I've been studying last year, we were studying missionary activity. Christendom, say what you like about the Christendom churches, they've been doing missionary work worldwide for centuries. We were looking at Scotland, actually, Scottish missionaries and London-based missionaries were particularly strong in Africa and China, Japan, these places. And so they were doing it, and they were the pioneers. They forged ahead with the missionary work. The witnesses came later, and they've probably built on a lot of the success that those early missionaries had, but particularly in places like Japan and China. Initial success there of Christian missionary works started to falter. And where the witnesses have been more successful is Europe, North and South America, where it's predominantly Roman Catholic and Protestant. And they've been able to change the minds of, at least from a basis of Protestantism or Roman Catholicism, where they've been able to, successfully convert, not in the likes of Japan, China, and India. And part of the reason for this, I find this interesting, but part of the reason I think is that in these countries, Japan, China, India, it's a completely different culture, right? They've already got their Shintoism and Buddhism and Hinduism, which are a completely formed religious ideas and theologies and gods, pantheon of gods, completely different cultures that the Christian or the Bible message just doesn't fit those cultures when you think about it. Because if you look at what the Bible says, and the witnesses actually, in fairness to them, they're not far off in this message, right? Because they talk about the new system and the kingdom being established and such like that. And they're not far wrong with that, because the early Christians were millenarians. They believed that Jesus was going to return back then and set up the kingdom in Jerusalem. So what the Bible's actually saying is that Jesus will reign from Jerusalem on the Mount Moriah, okay, in Jerusalem, Mount Zion. He would rule there, and he would restore Israel to its glory under Solomon and David, right? That's what the Bible accounts are all pointing to. So when Jesus was saying about preaching go forth to the nations and preach, it wasn't a campaign to convert the whole world, which would take centuries. as the witnesses are trying to tell us, right? And we've got to wait until the whole world is preached to and converted, because what the Jewish idea was that this diaspora of the Jews, the nation of Israel, the northern 10 tribes that were destroyed by Assyria, and spread all over the place. It was basically to restore Israel to its 12 tribes, to bring back the diaspora, to convert the Jews that had been spread across the known world at that point. That's who they were principally reaching out to. Jesus says, I've been sent to the tribes of Israel, right? So this preaching work to preach the world was to restore the dispersed Jews and bring them back, and that the Jewish king, the Messiah, would rule from Jerusalem, right? And when you look at things like the Psalm 2 and Psalm 110, what was the other one I was thinking of? Isaiah chapter 61, that Jesus quotes in the synagogue, "The Spirit is upon me to declare good news, to the lowly and the poor," and such like. When you look at those passages, it's all talking about the restoration of Israel, the nation of Israel, to its glory, and the kingdom would be restored. The glorious King on Jehovah's throne would rule from Jerusalem, and all the nations, particularly Isaiah 61, if you read it, it says that all the nations are basically going to see this great kingdom, this great kingship, and they're going to flock to Israel and bow down to the Israelite king. Okay, so it's not that the Israel is to go out to the world; it's the world that are to come to Israel
to them,
and bow before them, right?
Well,
so
that's interesting.
The whole preaching is not about converting all these different cultures, or even tolerating all these other cultures, as the Christian World Council of Churches today, they would say, oh, toleration of other beliefs and such like, all roads lead to God in the end. That's not what the Bible's saying. That's not what Jesus actually taught in the Bible. So this trying to convert Japan and China and India and all these places, it's an incongruous. It's trying to put a Jewish messianic idea about their nation and trying to convince all these other cultures that that's the one. I mean, I was thinking about it today. If you went to Alaska and tried to preach to the Eskimos in Alaska, aren't they? Am I getting that wrong? Wherever the Eskimos are. But if you went to the Eskimos and were preaching about original sin and about the Messiah reigning from Mount Zion, the Eskimo would probably look at you and go, original sin? What are you talking about? Would you like some seal meat instead? It's, to talk to them and to talk to cultures like Japan and China about original sin, and substitution of Christ's death and resurrection, it would mean absolutely nothing. It's trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, basically. So I don't know if I'm going off subject there a wee bit, but just a couple of thoughts that kind of just came to my mind today, thinking about this. And if I could dare say one more thing.
7 minutes.
7 minutes, right. I was thinking about the carts. Now, the carting work, I think, lends itself to countries like Japan and China and India and these places, because the witnesses are very low in numbers in these places, right? So they don't have enough people to basically, like, imagine him trying to preach to everybody in India, alone, or China, to knock every door, metaphorically, in these countries. Whereas standing at a cart or having some sort of physical thing to show, to advertise, makes sense in these kind of countries, but not in Europe.
Yeah, it's
not in the
funny, isn't it?
developed countries where they've got
Yeah.
large numbers. To stand at a cart and just advertise a presence is not enough. That's not preaching, you know. Um, but in these other countries, so it makes me kind of think that the carts in Europe and the developed countries, North America, etc., is lazy. It's the wrong tactic to be using. Um, and really, with the kind of internet, you could say that if you put your material on the internet, then it has a worldwide
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
reach now. So
Yeah.
there's no excuse to say that we still need to keep preaching to the ends of the earth, because with digital modern communication, the message is out there, and the
Mhm.
witnesses aren't the only ones. They seem to think they're the only ones that can do this, but you just need to look at YouTube and all with the
Yeah.
different
Oh, I know. Yeah.
groups
And
and
I
such
just
like.
if you just look at the cult of Donald Trump, for instance, it's easily done. Those little
Yeah.
hands, those big impressive figures, apart from last night, Donald, apart from last night.
Uh,
Right, anyway, we're going to have to wind it up. I just want a quick recap. So basically, I'm going for 2030 when this generation ends. You're going at the very most 2050. Remember those figures when we go to the Carters. If Armageddon is going to come in 2030 or 2050, at least 2 billion children between 1 and 18 will definitely die. If we go maybe children between 1 and 9, it's 1 million children will die. Either way, an absolute horrific figure. Anyway, thank you for your research, Dino. Thank you for answering those questions for us. Well, I'll bear those in mind. Everybody else wants to go and approach the quarters, those figures. Just a quick plug that you've just put up a new video today. Is that right?
yes. It was a couple of days ago, but yes, a new one up. And I'll try and do another follow-up. It's a small series I'm going to do on John 8:58. I am, before Abraham was, I am. I'm looking at that, Exodus 3:14. There's a lot to do in it. So I'm going to do maybe 4, 5 videos, even a lot of material.
And what's your channel called again? The
The Faithful Departed.
Faithful Departed. Right, okay. So
Yeah.
anyway, Dino's recently uploaded a video if you want
Okay.
to deep dive with Dino again. Right, we've just got enough time to say our goodbyes, and so I'll say first goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, folks. Thanks for watching. See you again.
Thumbs up if you like it, leave any comments if you wish to. Probably see you next time next week. Anyway, see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.